As a kid, I thought Digimon the Movie was the pinnacle of all things Digimon. I absolutely loved it, and it was one of the first movie experiences I cherished. And for years, that's how I thought all Digifans felt about the Digimon movie, that it was some of the best Digimon content we've ever had. Until I grew up and saw how others really felt about it. Now obviously that's not how everyone feels, but there's no doubt that Digimon the Movie is a way more controversial subject than I thought before I looked into it. And that controversy comes from something else I had no idea about when I sat down to watch the movie when I was just 6 or 7 years old. It was actually a compilation of 3 different, completely unrelated movies. So at long last, I finally sat down and rewatched our English version before watching the 3 original Japanese movies back to back to discover if I was actually wrong and the movies we got weren't as great as I remembered. And I discovered something. That Digimon the Movie still rules and its haters are being kind of mean. This is my defense of the Fox Kids masterpiece, Digimon the Movie. Let's start at the beginning. After the success of the Pokemon movies, Fox wanted to capitalize on that popularity with their own movie based on the Digimon property. The only problem is that no such Digimon movie on the scale of the Pokemon movies had ever been released in Japan. There did, however, exist 3 smaller Digimon specials that had been released for Toei Animation's seasonal fairs: Digimon Adventure, Our War Game, and Digimon Hurricane Landing, Transcendent Evolution, The Golden Digimentals. Fox decided that these 3 movies would instead be put together into one film for American audiences, rebranded as Digimon The Movie. Except Saban Entertainment didn't actually have the money for a full 2-hour epic depicting everything from the 3 short films. So Jeff Nimoy, the person in charge of the American Digimon localization as well as the lovably dorky voice of Tentomon, got to work on both cutting the films down into one 90-minute movie while trying to make all 3 parts narratively fit together. So how did he and the writers do on this pretty ambitious task? Let's go through the original films and their American counterparts for comparison. Firstly, we're treated to the magnum opus of all Digimon music with the Digirap, which everyone unanimously agrees is cool and good and there is no problem here, so let's just jump into the actual movie. The first part of the Digimon movie and its source material, just titled Digimon Adventure, follows Tai and Kari's first meeting with the Digimon. While in America this served as a sort of prequel flashback, in Japan it actually predated the Adventure series as a sort of prologue. And actually, not much has changed in the dub from the original. We get some narration from Kari that continues throughout the whole film, which is suitable since she's the only character who appears with a speaking role in all 3 films. The narration also helps tie these 3 parts together a little more cohesively, and Kari's American voice actor, Laura Jill Miller, has the voice of an angel, so I'm not complaining. She goes into giving a bit of context for Digimon, the Digidestined, and the adventures they'd go on. Some people criticize the movie a bit for being alienating to viewers who weren't already familiar with Digimon, so I think some credit is due to the dub for doing what little they could to get some introduction out of the way, which is something the original short films never actually do. This is also when the American movie introduces Willis, who takes a starring role in the 3rd part and the 3rd film. It's a little clunky to introduce him now. I mean, he's not a part of the first 2 Japanese films at all, but it works as a brief aside and doesn't impact the rest of the story of this section. After that, it's mostly edited down for time, which I think helps keep the fast-paced momentum of the movie. I also prefer the redone music here, which we'll get into that soon because that's a whole other segment. While the original has this sort of whimsical marching sound going throughout it, the dub provides its own original score that keeps more in line with the rest of Digimon the Movie. We also get some reused music from the American Digimon TV series that really makes it feel part of that universe. The biggest change here is actually a cutscene showing Tai and Kari's dad coming home drunk, and some of the more violent stuff from the fight scene. I get why some fans might be upset about the more mature stuff being cut, but for a younger American audience, I can totally see why. It's not pivotal to the story at all, and it's definitely something that would upset younger American fans and, more importantly, their parents watching along with them. So now on to the best section of the movie and the best of the 3 original movies, Our War Game. Like the section before it, there isn't much cut from Our War Game, and it's actually the most faithful part in here. The only major differences, again, are the inclusion of Willis, which I think worked great in context, and the music. Actually, there is a major difference, that being that they made an entire subplot out of Tai's mom, and it's hilarious. She goes from a pretty nothing character in the original to having this whole thing with cooking these weird dishes that for some reason Izzy loves, and it's actually super funny. I don't think I even caught onto this as a kid, but rewatching this movie, I'm impressed with how many new jokes they were able to cram in here.
So do I have enough of this stuff?
Beats me, it's the first time I've used flour to bake a cake.
Mom!
Back to the story. While in the original film, Izzy finds out about the online virus Digimon through some random anonymous friend from LA, this person has now been changed to Willis, which works really well at keeping him relevant in the film while not changing the original much at all. I can practically see the writers sighing in relief that they managed to fit this together so easily. In both films, the virus heads to America. In the Japanese, it's to launch a nuke, while in the dub, it's to reach Willis and launch a nuke. Again, this is a small change that doesn't change the outcome, being that the nuke is now headed towards Japan. I also want to shout out the voice acting again. I've always loved the American Digimon voice cast, and they really stand out here. Mona Marshall as Izzy probably gets the most to do in the whole series in this one, and it's great, but Joshua Seth as Tai is especially amazing. That guy's practically carried the American Digimon dub on his back for 20 years, and this movie is some of his best work. I think now would be a good time to talk about music changes because it's most noticeable in this second part. While the original film had a good, if pretty standard, original soundtrack, Digimon the Movie goes hard on a soundtrack full of ska and punk from the late 90s and early 2000s. And while some people may find it outdated now, I absolutely loved it as a kid and only appreciate it more now for what it is, this perfect musical time capsule. It's the music that really separates the Digimon movie as its own thing, and this is probably most clear in the climax of our war game when Omnimon is taking out swarms of Diaborimon. In the original film, this moment is scored by an ominous choir that, while suitably majestic, honestly feels like it would fit better in something like an Evangelion movie. Meanwhile, the American version blasts this punk rock song that gives it a youthful, energetic feeling that I absolutely ate up as a kid, and it still fires me up. Moments like this continued throughout the movie with action scenes and montages scored by artists like Fatboy Slim and Smash Mouth. And like I said earlier, the original score is great here too, taking cues from the iconic Digimon theme to bring some really emotional moments. While it's definitely a subjective feeling, I can't separate Digimon the Movie from its music, and I think it really gives it a unique feeling from straight out of the 2000s. When you couple that with the tech on screen, it's just, again, this perfect time capsule. And now we come to the final and most controversial part, the American adaptation of Digimon Hurricane Landing or Hurricane Touchdown. Jeff Nimoy actually planned on keeping Digimon the Movie solely based on the first two short films and releasing the third movie separately, but this idea was shot down by Saban. Instead, Hurricane Touchdown was cut down by 30 minutes and heavily edited to fit the other two parts. It's the most drastic change in all three and viewed as the weakest link in the movie by most fans. But after watching the full Japanese Hurricane Landing, Hurricane Touchdown movie by itself, I have to ask, was it ever that good to begin with?
Ow! You take that back, girl!
I mean, it's not bad by any means, but the third film is also the weakest of the three original short movies. In fact, Hurricane Landing even has a different director. The first two films were directed by Mamoru Hosoda, arguably one of the greatest anime film directors of all time. Hurricane Landing was directed by Shigeyasu Yamauchi, who's probably best known for his work on a few Dragon Ball Z movies. And like those movies, Hurricane Touchdown feels like a decent anime special, but nowhere near the cinematic quality of our wargame. So right out of the gate, the third part of the Digimon movie was always adapting a slightly lesser movie with less screen time, but in the end, I think its format actually helped the movie more than hurt it. We start this part of the movie off by finally bringing Willis to the forefront with one of his two Digimon, Kokomon, transforming into Wendigamon. While in the original movie this just sort of happens, the dub explains that this is actually the virus from our wargame infecting it. I think this is again a pretty good change to keep everything in the Digimon movie tied together, and once again doesn't change the actual sequence of events, only the context. Willis has even more backstory that I'll come back to in a bit. Again, we have to talk about the music in this part, which is the biggest upgrade here. I'll agree that the music difference up until now has been a subjective taste, but I really don't enjoy the original music in Hurricane Touchdown. It alternates between this sort of awkward country guitar and really off-putting, jazzy, I don't even know what to call it. I guess I sort of know they were going for by making Wendigamon and its evolution seem creepy, and the guitar and the jazz is kind of supposed to be like an Americana thing, but it makes all the action scenes kind of hard to watch with how dissonant the music is. The dub, of course, keeps the same OST, filled with orchestral and punk music. It loses some uniqueness, I guess, but I vastly prefer a more lighthearted score over what we got originally. The next biggest change is all the cuts, most notably the B-plot of the original Digidestin being kidnapped during Hurricane Touchdown. Heck, a lot of people who only ever watched the dub don't even know this ever was supposed to have happened. And while it's a pretty big thing to cut, in retrospect, I don't think it's that bad of a change if you really had to lose something. I mean, it's not purely a positive cut. It's cool seeing the original team pop up again in the Japanese version, and it adds a sense of urgency to beating Wendigamon, but in the end, I don't think taking them out affects the overall story too much. We don't even see them get rescued. It's kind of a non-issue by the end. And this is Willis's story after all. I can see why they'd want to save more time to focus on him and the 02 team and his Digimon. There's some more cuts here and there, but by and large it still follows the same storyline, just edited for time, so we basically get the slightly abridged version. And I think it works more than it doesn't. The original Hurricane Landing is kind of a meandering movie. The pacing is weird, we don't really know what's going on for a lot of it, and the characters jump around constantly. Turning this whole movie into a climax of sorts, and just shortening it a bit to keep it moving faster, actually makes it a more fun watch in my opinion. And again, this is coming from someone who just watched both versions back to back. It's not all perfect, there's some weird editing in spots and the pacing still isn't great, but I think the severity of the cuts by some critics is a bit over dramatic. We still get all the same action and emotional beats, just slightly repackaged. The second major change about Willis is revealed halfway through this part when he explains that he was the one who originally created the virus Digimon in our wargame, when he wanted another friend to play with. This idea is completely made up in the American dub, and it actually adds another layer to his character while tying in the Our War Game section in a suitable way. Again, we seem to like to poke fun at this movie being a kind of chimera of films that didn't fit together, but they did a pretty good job making them fit together, I have to say. Up until this point, Willis is insistent that he should deal with Wendigamon alone. While in the original, this is just because Wendigamon was originally his Kokomon, the dub actually takes this one step further and makes it even more tragic. He thinks everything that's happening is his fault. Kokomon being corrupted is a direct result of his actions. He didn't appreciate what he had, and now he's facing the price for it. It makes him a lot more of a tragic character, and I like the reason for his stubbornness a lot more in the dub. On to the ending. Both films kind of have a rushed, awkward conclusion. It makes a bit more sense in the original and is a bit more violent too, but again, I think I like the faster pacing of Digimon the Movie more. We finally wrap up with maybe the strangest part of the dub, Kokomon dancing to All Star by Smash Mouth. It's stupid, and it doesn't make sense in the movie, but I still love it anyway. In the end, despite the controversy inside Fox and with the fanbase, I think adding Hurricane Touchdown to Digimon the Movie was a deserving end cap. This was, after all, the first time we got to see some Digimon action take place in the West, in America. Digimon Adventure up until that point never shied away from the fact it all took place in Japan, so getting to see our favorite Digi characters battle in New York and Colorado was a pretty cool thing worthy of being on the big screen. Heck, I'm Canadian, and even I thought it was cool seeing the Digidestined show up in America. And I think that is where I'll conclude my argument here in defense of Digimon the Movie. Despite any flaws, I loved Digimon the Movie as a kid, and I still do today. And doesn't that mean it did its job? As a kid, I didn't notice the strange pacing or editing. I loved it for the fights, the music, the jokes, the epic moments. Their job was to put 3 movies in one, and in the eyes of a young Digifan, they succeeded. I never had a clue it was 3 separate movies at that time, and I don't think most American fans did either until learning about it online years and years later. There's also the fact that we simply never would have gotten anything from these 3 films in English if they hadn't been edited together and dubbed for America. There's no way they would have released these 3 specials in the original languages in theaters, and even less of a chance that we'd even like it in that format back then. I was 6 and they made the absolute best movie they could in the eyes of a 6-year-old Digimon fan. Today, I appreciate the movie for the memories it's given me, the hard work of the localization crew, and how they were able to take 3 completely different movies and somehow create a mostly convincing story through it all. I'm glad we ever got a Digimon movie at all, and more glad still that 20 years later we're still talking about Digimon the Movie.